Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer. Today I'm joined by Sara Gon. Sara, how are you doing?
Well, thank you, Nick. Well, thank you. Sorry if we were a bit late, it's because we were laughing at the possibilities that are endless to be discussed.
Indeed, as regular listeners may know, we actually kind of pull from a short list of stories here, and we often have to cut ones that are very wacky, but aren't quite as important as some of the stuff we do talk about. And I'm also joined today by Michael Morris. Michael, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I do sometimes wonder whether I'm sure our readers would actually appreciate it, but how much they'd appreciate our inadvertently switching on the mics and the cameras in the course of that preludial chat.
I'd probably have to put the explicit filter on the podcasts then at that point.
Yes, exactly. We might need some legal advice here, but anyway, I think our conversations are. Anyway, candid and hopefully amusing. Anyway,
indeed. Maybe we should think about doing that. But let's get into our first story for today. And I don't know, this story seems it's a little bit like having deja vu. It just sort of keeps feeling like you're running up the same hill here. It's a kind of Sisyphean type of story here, which is the ongoing chaos in the city of Johannesburg, which seems like it's going to have no stable government anytime soon. And the latest development is that after the PA essentially forced the mayoral candidate, Tapelo Ahmad from Al Jamaha, to resign in Joburg after a number of terrible interviews he gave, the ANC and EFF coalition seems once again on the rocks. The council held a sitting at the cost of R500,000, which is apparently how much it costs for every single council sitting. And having attended those in the past, I know why. There's sort of food and there's lights and all sorts of staff come in and there's things printed and there's huge piles of documents that get printed for every single one. It's always it feels like a very inefficient process, but that's neither here nor there, I suppose. And despite ANC provincial leader Panyaza Lesufi sitting in the gallery, hoping to kind of keep an eye on his own ANC caucus, the ANC revolted against what he had agreed between the ANC and the EFF. The ANC and EFF had agreed behind closed doors previously that they would support another candidate from Al Jamaha, another candidate from a minority party, but it seems like the majority of the ANC caucus in Joburg was not particularly happy with this. In fact, they protested, saying that this was in fact going against the national directives of the ANC, which had recently decided in a national executive committee that the party with the most votes in hung councils should be supported for the mayoral seats, i.e. the ANC should vote for itself to be the mayor in pretty much any circumstance where it's the second largest party, which is almost all the councils. And this internal fighting meant that while the meeting was supposed to start at about 10, there were numerous delays. There were caucus meetings called. There was sort of fighting behind closed doors amongst the ANC caucus. The EFF tried to push ahead with the council proceedings, but that didn't really work. And then finally, just as it looked like a vote was about to go ahead at about 4:00 in the afternoon, the ANC councillors walked out in violation against the wishes of their own provincial leader. And Panyaza Lesufi was heard to be saying from the gallery, "Wait, are those our councillors walking out?" In a bit of horror at the realization that the rebellion had broken out. So once again, it really does seem like the ANC-EFF coalition is not quite as smooth as the sort of ideological compatibility between the two would suggest. The ANC rebels said the coalition framework that the ANC's NEC adopted is clear and states that the party needs to stop supporting smaller parties, as this was going against the democratic processes, given the ANC had the most support, but was outsourcing this to parties with little support. We ANC councillors would rather support our own and not have another embarrassing situation where a councillor from a smaller party takes over. There are more suitable candidates should the issue even be us having to support a smaller party. We should have gone for Cope's Makubela, who's currently the speaker, or even a tried and tested councillor such as Margaret Arnolds, who is from the AIC. That sort of weird party that might just be voted for because its name looks a lot like the ANC. Anyway, Sara, let's start with you. What do you make of all this? It really seems here like Panyaza Lesufi is not quite, things are not going according to plan for him?
My favorite MEC of education. He was the most, he was not only wrong a lot of the time, but he was also very disruptive and he put his nose in places where all he ended up doing was aggravating the situation. But I never thought I'd see him aggravate the situation with his own colleagues. And I know that the Premier can legally close down a municipality that isn't functioning well. But for him to get involved with city council seems to me a recipe for disaster, and particularly as he's known to have this relationship with the EFF. And I don't know whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, certainly another Altamar councillor, I mean, it's the kiss of death, but it just, if anyone should understand that you kind of don't interfere outside of your lane, it should be someone like Panyaza Lesufi, because there are very distinct power blocks at city council level, ANC and EFF, and they are not, much as they look stable in getting rid of overturning other councils, they are not that stable, because it's not actually about ideology. It's about patronage. And so is their choice of mayor is about securing that patronage. So I kind of think that Lesufi should have been paying attention to provincial affairs and creating little sort of police light groupings that he can send out there in green overalls to probably get shot and killed by gangsters. But nevertheless, I think his involvement is just because he's an arrogant man, and I don't think that would have gone well. So I'm not entirely surprised. I'm just probably more surprised at the one thing that we deal with over and over again, and that's the Action SA complaining that the DA wants to put forward a candidate, and the DA keeps saying, but in terms of our agreement as a coalition, that's our right to do so, being the largest party. So Johannesburg is not.
Seem to have lost.
It's not only literally a mess; it's figuratively a mess.
Yeah, it's sort of quite. This is what's quite interesting about this is that while the ANC coalition is in chaos, the other side's coalition, the anti-ANC coalition, doesn't seem to be in a particularly strong position either. They don't have the votes in Joburg as well without the Patriotic Alliance. And the DA has basically already drawn the line in the sand, saying they're not going back into coalition with the Patriotic Alliance unless it's in a very limited role. Awkwardly, part of the reason that Al Jamaha seems to have wanted to be put forward the candidate for the ANC again is that they allegedly only agreed to resign from the mayorship without having to be voted out by their own coalition, which would have been very embarrassing. If another person from their party assumed the mayorship, which is something that apparently Lesufi and the EFF agreed to. But it doesn't look like it's going ahead. Michael, what do you make of all this? Once again, it suggests that even if a sort of ANC-EFF coalition takes power in national government in 2024, it's going to be a little bit of a rocky ride.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely a conclusion we can draw. There might be some consolation to borrow from Sara's conception of it in the idea that for the ANC, for rank and file ANC councillors, it's not about ideology, it's about patronage, which would suggest possibly that the much feared ANC-EFF coalition can be ruled out. There's just be just too much for them to lose, either party, I suppose, to lose, certainly the ANC to lose in terms of patronage. But who knows? It's very, very difficult to tell. I mean, this just shows how what a mess can occur, as Sara says, whether figuratively and literally. Just such a delightful question from Lesufi, who clearly was there because he was there, there to witness his grand plan become manifest. And then he was left having to ask, are those our councillors walking out with no doubt an element of disbelief. But yes, all very much up in the air, I think. keep worrying about what this conveys to voters, or how voters make sense of this, whether it'll confirm in too many minds the idea that, you know, democracy is all just a waste of time, it's all a lot of nonsense, it's just about the small handful of people looking for what suits them most, what they can get out of being in public office, and has very little to do with public service, or whether people will begin to appreciate that, you know, this kind of very mercurial nature of this, the unpredictability of it, is in fact potentially the basis of a virtue. It means that the change does become possible, that nothing is sort of set in stone, that it is possible to get involved and influence events. But we'll have to see. And as you say, I think initially it's likely going to be a fairly rocky path as we move away from the sort of megalithic contest or party contests to one where there are lots of players, and the ground is shifting constantly.
In the short term, however, I kind of really do wonder now what's going to happen to Joburg. It is still South Africa's most important city by a long way. And you might say, well, if the chaos continues, then the city will be placed under provincial administration, which will, even though that's probably not going to improve the city much, it will at least give it a bit of stability. But yeah, I can see it very possible that the coalitions will be just stable enough to fend off the administration, but not actually stable enough to implement anything. You know, really getting the city administration under control can take a long time, particularly if you're not in the ANC, because most of the members of the ANC, of the city administration, are ANC officials. So one wonders whether Joburg has really any possibility of anything except serious decay in the next few years. Sara, what's your thoughts?
Two comments. I think the only way to save Joburg is to give it to the private sector, lock, stock and barrel. And second is, I don't think we should pay any attention to what Michael Morris says about anything about the city, because he lives in a city that has the same mayor today that it had last week and the week before and the week before and the week before ad infinitum.
We're not jealous, Michael.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. I know. I mean, I realize sometimes when I see comments on social media or listen to people talking in the road, whatever, and you have this kind of undertow of pessimism and sense of misery, and I've got to really kind of concentrate, try to picture why this is so, because generally, you know, we're quite optimistic here. We, as you say, you know, we have a fairly solid, stable administration in the city, the province, people who say sensible things, who deal with crises in kind of fairly open and sensible ways. So yeah, I appreciate it. It is different, and I wish you all the best.
I think this thank you. I think this question of how the ANC and EFF cooperate in government is one of the most important questions as we go forward to next year's elections, because it really, I think, will give people an insight into what lies in store for the country going ahead, or what potentially could lie in store. As for what you said earlier, Michael, about how voters view this, I think that a big problem in South Africa is that voters just actually generally don't have a lot of information on what's going on. We are quite a cynical, disconnected population. Very few people engage with media outside of the SABC, and even then, they don't engage with the news side that much. So I really do wonder how much of the details of this are even getting through to people. An interesting survey to be done, if someone had the money for it, would be to survey the citizens of Johannesburg and ask them which party was in control of the government. Now, part of the problem with that survey is that the answer might change by the time the survey results come in, but still, I suspect you'd have a very large percentage of people who had no idea all of this was going on. And that is a problem too, because it means that, you know, people aren't necessarily as responsive to what's going on as they should be. But anyway, we'll do our part on the Daily Friend Show to keep talking about these things so that people are informed. But let's move on to our next story. And this is, I don't know really what to call this, a sort of little public spat between the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, Naledi Pandor, and a group of organizations representing people from the arts. I think creative industries, trade union of musicians, and women in arts dialogue. So 7 months ago, Naledi Pandor was giving a talk to a discussion, one of these committee discussion things, and she went on to say that, no offense to people from the arts, but we need highly trained people in science, engineering, technology, finance, and the economic sector if we really want to boost the economy in South Africa and across Africa as a whole. Fairly run-of-the-mill stuff for a politician to say. But when this video went viral on social the past week, it drew forth a lot of anger from various groups in the sort of creative and arts scene. The South African United Cultural and Creative Industries Federation said, and I'm going to quote from the media statement directly, has noted the undermining comments made by Minister Naledi Pandor. The minister stressed the need for people to learn critical skills while also seemingly throwing shade at the arts. We demand an apology and a withdrawal of such remarks. The trade union of musicians said it is not going to be left unchallenged by a sector that delivers more than 75 billion rand to the South African annual GDP. We as music practitioners are in communication with actors as well as the Theatre and Dance Alliance to discuss a unified and unequivocal challenge to this irresponsible and arrogant conduct from one of our leaders. And the Women in Arts Dialogue, under the banner of the spirit of 1956, said, it's disturbing to watch such ignorance from our leader. We hope the ANC's Women's League can consider having a session with the spirit of 1956 to educate them and their colleague Naledi Pandor. Naledi Pandor's office has since issued an apology for her remarks, saying that she didn't mean to disparage the creative arts. But Michael, this all just seems really silly because she's right. We do need more steps. There's only so much space in any economy for creative industries, and those are industries where only really a very small group of talented people generally make a proper living from it. What's your thoughts on this?
I mean, as we were sort of discussing before the show began, and it's perhaps evident in the kind of bookshelves behind me and the paintings on the walls and so on, I find technology and science pretty interesting, but nowhere near as interesting as the arts. So I'm very much an arts person. But I just can't help feeling that the official arts establishment, which almost by definition, in fact, means non-artist, actually, these administrators and so on, have actually got this quite wrong. And that, as you say, a thriving country depends on science and technology in the modern world, perhaps always has. Indeed, if you think of the Renaissance and all the great sort of exercises of patronage and all that great investment in artistic flourishing, all actually came from business, science, technology, exploration, and so on. And that the arts are in fact much more likely to thrive under conditions in which science and technological competence is the bedrock of the society. But there's another thing which I think is also quite almost pathetically overlooked in all these statements from these art worthies, is that you always feel that a condition of producing good art is that or the artistic enterprise generally is actually in a sense to be in battle, to be against the grain, especially in relation to ministers and states as big and early agedness as the ANC one is, and that perhaps the biggest risk, and don't we see it so often, is the willingness of these arts bodies to go along with and to be part of the approved version of things, the approved powers, and they're looking for buddies and bouquets from an organization as dodgy as the ANC. I mean, that really is the problem. And so it's really quite amusing, as you say, to see them getting hot under the collar and wanting an apology, when in fact this is quite possibly what she's expressing is quite possibly the very condition that is likely to lead to a flourishing of the arts. And who could possibly fault her?
Right. I think it's also particularly because South Africa is so weak in our STEM sciences. It is a particular weak spot for our education. I think it is worth focusing on as a place. Now, whether Naledi Pandor or her government is actually really, doing anything to improve STEM is a different question, but it's right to identify it as a priority. Not to say that simply by focusing on STEM will you kind of magic up economic growth, but considering how weak our math skills in general are, I think it would go a long way to at least providing the raw materials for an economic boom. So I think. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just going to add just very briefly, because I think this is perhaps also important, is that instead of what we so often see, arts workers and the people who are in that sort of workerist strata that underpins so much of what the ANC does, instead of all of that, what we could have is very considered lobbying to restore public art galleries. I don't know what Johannesburg art galleries like today, and our I mean, that would be something if instead of being sycophantic and fawning and so on about the ideological drift of so much of what the ANC does, which I think the established art community tends to do. Go against the grain, tackle them, lobby them, highlight the grave deficiencies, museums and art galleries, as I say, music, ballet companies, opera, and so on. We have enormous talent in this country, and I think a lot of it is underserved by very badly managed or poorly supplied investment coming from taxpayers. I know this is a controversial thing. We argue among colleagues about this, but I mean, that is really something that they could do. Not getting an apology for
for insulting their honor.
Throwing shade.
Sorry, throwing shade. What do you make of this, Sara?
As somebody who worked for some time in the arts, the response just makes me very angry. It's immature. It's kind of woke. It's hurt. It's upset, and it's just not important. The importance is for the arts bodies to resurrect the arts in general, whatever art they are, whatever it is find funding, speak to the government, whatever, but just get your craft properly organized. She may well have been talking about the fact, and this is a fact, that one of the problems is that too many Black university students go into the arts. In other words, bachelor's degrees in arts, various types of arts, and we need more science. Now that's indisputable. That's absolutely indisputable. So to want an apology over this, it just shows a sort of, I'm inclined to assume that a narrow vision displays a wider outrage. It's absolute nonsense.
I must say I was greatly amused by the idea that the musicians as well as the Theatre and Dance Alliance are going to form this sort of super organization that will crush the irresponsible and arrogant conduct in their own words. Look, these are industries, and I think that the trade union musicians had a good point here. They do contribute to the economy, and they do help, and there is more space for that stuff to grow. We actually just had a talk to our internal discussion group yesterday about the importance of film in South Africa and the potential for film industry here. But it's not, it's not a thing where necessarily you need to have that much sort of formal training. Although I think that's controversial amongst artists, but it's something that a lot of people can get into through experience. And personal dedication to the arts. You don't have to have a university, formal education to be a great artist. Whereas to be a great scientist, you do. And so we kind of should be focusing on that stuff. Right. Let's move on to our next story. And this is I don't know how much time we're going to spend on this one, but it is kind of crazy. The DA is very upset in the city of eThekwini, so in Durban, because it has discovered that an ANC ward councillor for Mayville who is currently in jail awaiting trial for allegedly murdering his predecessor, who was another ANC ward councillor, who he then took over from once this person had been killed, is apparently still receiving his salary from the city of eThekwini as a ward councillor, despite the fact that he's supposed to have been declared not a member of the caucus and and the seat made vacant. The city responded by saying eThekwini municipality can confirm that it is finalizing the processes related to one of its councillors who is in jail awaiting trial. There are legislated processes that must be followed in instances of a councillor's misconduct, and the council needs to follow these processes to the letter, failing which council would be opening itself up for a legal challenge. Sara, what do you make of all this?
Oh, I think they should take a bit of a chance here. But the very simple labour law advice, if you have an employee in jail, you don't wait until he's been charged before you fire him or goes to court or has found guilty, has a sentence. What you can do is you can either hold a disciplinary hearing in his absence, because on the balance of probabilities he's committed literally a crime, misconduct, shall we call it, or they can retrench him for not being available to fill his post. Or you can accuse him of incapacity and still have a disciplinary. So the options are limitless. But one thing you don't have to do as an employer is wait for processes to finish. He wants to come back at you afterwards, but the ANC's got much bigger issues to worry about than him.
No, definitely. I believe that if you don't attend 2 council sittings without an excuse in a row accepted by the speaker, then you can be fired. At least that was the rule in the Joburg Council. So one presumes that while awaiting trial for murder of another ANC councillor, that you could maybe speed the process along a little bit. Michael, what do you make of this?
Well, I'm very grateful that Sara's here to give us a kind of informed view of this thing, because I kind of looked at it and I thought, well, of course it's outrageous. And then the more you kind of think about it, or the more I was thinking about it, I thought, well, if the guy hasn't been found guilty, can you penalize him for that? But I kept realizing, it's not simply a straightforward question of principle. It's actually quite a practical thing. And Sara has thankfully provided the answer that, and once again, an instance of this issue of accountability, which keeps cropping up. We see it almost in every story, is the absence of that sense of accountability means that there aren't people, employers in eThekwini, sitting down and saying, well, here's a guy who's meant to be serving the public, but he can't because he's sitting in prison. Whatever the merits of the case, it's something we've got to deal with. We've got to have somebody representing that ward, and let's do this sensibly and do this. Yeah.
I can't say that his chances sound particularly good if he's not able to get bail to get out of prison. I suspect that the case against him might be quite strong. But it's just also another kind of yet more of the sort of blurring between the lines of sort of I think crime and politicians. I think there was a EFF provincial leader who got elected at an EFF Congress. He wasn't there, but he got elected. I think this was in the Northwest, while literally in jail for murder. You just think, we can surely do better than this. Any final thoughts, Sara?
No, look, I think Sandra is correct in the comments that they can just stop paying him. I mean, just as I said, just stop paying him, and whatever process needs to be followed it, and he's gone. And worry about it when he's released in 20 years' time.
Madness, all of it. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. We hope that you found the show interesting, and we will be back tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show. Cheers, everyone, and have a wonderful day.